Hi everyone, Knight here, and welcome to a pilot episode, which is going to basically be analysing the Manchester derby. If you like the idea behind the video, if you think this is a series that should become a thing, do let me know in the comments below. So despite many pundits and people anticipating that Mourinho might opt to play with a back five, he actually went with the deep 4-2-3-1. Whilst Pep Guardiola's Manchester City side, unsurprisingly, stuck with the 4-3-3, they've really been playing for the mass majority of this season. Mourinho entered the game clearly seeing Delph as the City backline's main weakness, anticipating he'd also be playing more as an inverted fullback, as we've seen him do quite a lot for Man City, and therefore end up drifting a lot central due to both his role and natural instinct. Mourinho instructed most long balls, especially early on, and crosses later on in the game to actually head towards United's right flank. And at the start of the game we saw Lukaku positioning himself more towards the kind of side that both Otamendi and Delph were on. This was an intelligent idea as well, because Otamendi tended really to more step into midfield when Man City were in the opposition half and would tend to leave more of a gap behind him as opposed to Company on the other side. Mourinho also interestingly opted to go with Lingard, kind of as the second striker or playmaker, floating just off Lukaku. More than likely down to the pace that he possesses, as opposed to Mata and of course Mkhitaryan, who was injured. By going with the pacier player alongside Rashford, who started out on the left hand side, and Anthony Martial on the right hand side, the theory really was clear that it would help United transition from back to front quicker. City were going to see a lot of the ball. We're naturally going to play with quite a slow tempo and hold on to the ball a lot in Man United's half, so Man United, in typical Mourinho fashion, were wanting to play on the counter-attack. Unfortunately though, it did become clear that United lacked passing accuracy in the final third, with many of their through balls and direct passes forward being misplaced when they did actually get an opportunity to counter-attack, especially early on. Also taking into regard Lingard's poor defensive awareness to pick up David Silva for the first goal from the set piece, it does make you wonder if Mata's extra ability from a technical point of view and experience could have been a better choice to start off the game with, sacrificing that extra bit of pace that Mata may not have been able to offer, because Lingard certainly had a poor game. Even though, to be honest, Lukaku wasn't much better defensively for either goal, so not all the blame can obviously be put on Lingard. Guardiola knew that both Matic and Herrera were employed essentially as defensive midfielders to provide protection for the back four and lock up both of City's key playmakers, in this case Silva and De Bruyne. Guardiola therefore needed a plan similar to kind of what he did against Chelsea, where he utilised Delph to give City an extra man in midfield to try and free up one of his key playmakers in the centre of the park. And believe it or not, it only took him 15 minutes to perform the tweaks necessary and nullify United's man marking that they began the game with in the central areas. Now Sterling did start off on the right hand side, and he was key to Guardiola's plan. He was told to clearly roam as he pleases rather than play as an out-and-out winger slash inside forward as he's done all season, and focus mainly on playing within the wide areas. And this would basically result in City essentially gaining an extra man, with Sterling coming more central, picking the ball up deeper and making more dribbles through the middle of the park. He can obviously and does have experience playing in the central areas, does Raheem Sterling. It would result in City gaining an extra man centrally. It allowed Fernandinho to focus more on protecting the back four, and to do this, he utilised Delph as a extremely conservative inverted fullback, as opposed to Kyle Walker, who was up and down the touchline relatively often throughout the game. And this was important because Delph had to stay conservative, with Sane being moved over towards the right hand side and no out and out winger really being left to cover this side of the pitch for Man City. So it was a gamble from Guardiola, and Sterling of course at times was drifting out left, but we mainly saw Gabriel Silva drift more out into the space available on the left hand side to try and pick the ball up a little bit more. So with Sterling coming more into the central areas and with Lingard not really tracking back much, suddenly the man marking that United looked to employ in the middle of the park was made obsolete, and De Bruyne started finding a lot more room and Silva started finding a lot more room, because as Man City looked to attack through the middle, suddenly City had a bit of a numerical advantage in the central areas. Delph also willing to come into the central areas in the middle of the park when required to recycle possession also obviously helped City retain possession. So now the question is, why was Sane moved out to the right hand side when really we've seen him mainly play out on the left hand side for most of the season on his more favoured left foot? Well, the idea was if he was moved over to the right hand side he could play more as an inside forward. Being left footed, this would not only help Man City retain possession because Sane would be facing inside on his favoured foot, but it would also mean that he'd aim to dribble inside quite a lot and dribble towards the box in the central areas quite a lot. And with Ashley Young not really naturally being a defender, obviously this was a great idea because he's naturally a winger and having to defend on his right foot would always cause him problems. Gabriel Jesus, meanwhile, would look to occupy the room out on the left-hand side. Because he's right-footed, he too looked to try and adopt more of an inside-forward role, look to supplement the midfield, ensure he's always providing an extra passing option within the final third, but also run at the defence and cause them problems that way. And of course, with Gabriel Silva being the main out-and-out striker on the pitch, it makes sense to play him as an inside forward on his more favoured foot facing the goal so he can shoot more. Throughout the game, we did see quite a lot of crosses from deep areas come out from Delph, as well as obviously a lot of crosses from other areas, but in particular crosses from deep areas around here from Delph when United were looking to defend deep, and those crosses would end up being deep crosses aimed towards the back post, where Ashley Young would have to deal with balls aerially. With Sane being at least 9 or 10 centimetres taller than Ashley Young, we did actually see it pay off for one opportunity where Sane managed to beat Young in the air and get a shot off on goal. So that, amongst many, is another reason why moving Sane out to the right-hand side not only emphasised that Guardiola was looking to try and take advantage of Ashley Young, but why it was also an intelligent decision. We spoke about Guardiola aiming to exploit Ashley Young, but as we mentioned earlier, Mourinho was also more than aware of the weaknesses that Delph possessed. So throughout the game, we constantly saw United try and emphasise attacks with direct balls or attempted crosses down towards Fabian Delph's side, particularly aerially, where Delph failed on numerous occasions to deal with the ball in the air. Eventually it paid off when a cross towards the back post towards Fabian Delph, which was initially missed by Otamendi, was poorly defended by the English central midfielder, and Marcus Rashford, of course, who was constantly swapping flanks with Martial, slotted home the equaliser. And if you watch the game back, you'll see on numerous occasions Delph really struggled to deal with direct balls down the left-hand side. Coming straight out of the second half, Guardiola made a bold move by dropping Fernandinho to centre-back and actually substituting Kompany off. I do know these numbers aren't right, by the way, and bringing Gundogan on. So even though the actual swap itself didn't necessarily last long enough to really make a significant impact once Otamendi got what eventually became the 54th minute winner, obviously thanks to Lukaku's second error of the match defensively from a set piece. Mangala was substituted on for Gabriel Jesus, and then Fernandinho did eventually return to midfield. What it does, however, show was that Guardiola, coming straight out into the second half, was adamant that United weren't going to change things around from the bus parking they were doing, and they weren't going to come out offensively in the second half, and instead he wanted to be more positive himself, and that really shows the contrast of mentalities for both managers. The interesting move here by Pep was that once Gabriel Silva was substituted off, it was actually David Silva who became more of a false nine playing up front on his own, rather than opt to substitute on Sergio Aguero after City's second goal. So he was playing more as a false nine, and City's formation, with Gundogan moving onto the pitch, really became more of a 4-1-4-1. So Fernandinho moved back out of defence to play as more of a defensive midfielder anchorman role to rally in front of the back four, and obviously Mangala was then substituted on to take place at centre-back. Silva playing as a false nine helped City not only retain the ball further in an extremely technically gifted and congested midfield, but also created space for the runs of De Bruyne, Sané and Sterling. So in the final third, as David Silva would drop deep to pick the ball up, chances are a defender would look to follow him, and then that would create more room for runs to be made in behind from the pacey wide players or the playmakers looking to get forward. So even though City got the second goal and dropped a little bit deeper, dropped their tempo a little bit more. You could tell they were trying to hold on to the goal advantage they had and frustrate Man United and keep the ball as much as possible, because if United can't win the ball back, they can't counter-attack, which was really their main game plan. It still allowed City to remain a threat offensively, and the fact that Mourinho really struggled to do anything about the extra man that City were essentially giving themselves in midfield by giving Sterling more of a free roam in central areas at times and just generally having a much better technical midfield, United were struggling. United eventually decided to change it around in the 76th minute when Ibrahimovic was substituted on for Lingard, and the 4-2-3-1 really became more of a 4-4-2, but with the substitution happening in the 75th minute, questions were really being asked as to whether or not it was left too late. Mata eventually came on in the 82nd minute and looked to play just off the two strikers as he came on for Herrera in the 82nd minute. But bar Lukaku's kind of point-blank shot that he really should have scored that was saved miraculously somehow by Ederson, it was a poor game by both sides. What it did prove, however, was that City so far smell like champions. They always say that when you don't necessarily play well, which they didn't to their usual standards despite retaining possession very well, granted United made it quite easy for them to do so, they still find a way to win, which is exactly what Man City did. And when you don't play well and you can still somehow find a way to win, especially in a Manchester derby, that is usually the sign of champions. And even though you might argue that United led their own downfall, well, if you make the mistakes that Man United did in a game of this calibre, then you can argue you probably don't deserve to be champions anyways. United, however, definitely missed Pogba significantly. He offers both fantastic pace and technical ability going forward and could have added more composure on the few occasions, especially early on, that Manchester United did manage to counter-attack from, which could have led to a higher passing completion ratio. That's why I also said maybe Mata would have been a better choice as opposed to Lingard. In fact, Man United's passing success percentage by the end of the game was only 68% in comparison to City's 83%. And for anyone who watched the game, that wasn't necessarily down to City intercepting or tackling more. In fact, Man United, as far as those stats are concerned, still intercepted the ball more, still tackled the ball more, was still the more aggressive team. But Man United's passing was atrocious throughout. Once Matic began being overwhelmed in the middle of the park, once City started having more central players thanks to the inside wing-back, and Sterling being given more of a central role, his interceptions started to die down because Man City were just keeping the ball too well and created too many passing triangles. Herrera really was lacklustre, and even though Rashford, Lingard and Martial were mature in ensuring that they tracked back, which led to United's incredibly deep shape at times, when they would eventually win the ball back, these pacey players out wide and Lingard were so far back in their own half most of the time that when United actually had a chance to counter-attack, there was nobody available in the Man City half to receive the ball except Lukaku, who was essentially left chasing down long balls. Overall, Mourinho went into the match with the right ideas. Unlike many who predicted he'd play 5 in defence with wing-backs, which would not have been a good idea because that only would have invited more pressure with less men centrally in the middle of the park, would have reduced United's counter-attacking abilities in the wide areas where they'd be able to double up, which are also City's weak areas, which we saw Mourinho try and exploit, but also would have reduced the United midfield pressure. They could have put on City's true secret weapons in the form of Silva and De Bruyne. On another day, it could have ended a draw, or United could have even won the match, but in truth, it was a sloppy game, and all I can probably say as a neutral is I hope the title race next year is a little bit more exciting. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.